I never imagined that a simple gesture, something as small as a bouquet of roses, could tear the ground from under my feet and completely redefine how I viewed my marriage. It was Valentine's Day, and I woke up believing it would be one of those special days, one of those days when love seems lighter, when small details gain meaning, when you feel at the center of the priorities of the person who promised to walk beside you. But when I came downstairs and saw the scene before me, something inside me stopped. There he was, my husband, smiling and handing a beautiful bouquet of fresh, vibrant red roses directly to my sister. For a moment, everything went silent, as if the world had lost its sound. His gaze shone, as if he were doing something beautiful. Hers was divided between surprise and something I couldn't decipher. And me, I felt a dry impact on my chest, an overwhelming confusion, as if I were witnessing something that didn't belong to me, but that should be mine. The pain came. Unbidden. Not the kind of pain that makes you cry, but the kind that leaves you immobile, breathing slowly so as not to collapse. It was a mixture of silent humiliation, shock, and a profound sense of betrayal that I still couldn't explain. I tried to smile. I tried to convince myself that maybe it was just an innocent gesture, a mistake, a joke, but something inside me whispered that there was more to it than just an out-of-place gift. It was as if my heart knew before my mind that this scene hid something bigger, something I wasn't ready to see yet. And at that moment, while my husband was saying nice things to her and my sister was feigning discomfort, I felt something growing inside me. It wasn't hatred nor anger. It was an unexpected strength, a firm, almost cold inner voice that said, if he thought that would destroy me, he was very wrong. And it was right there, among red roses and a deafening silence, that my day began to change. If someone were looking from the outside, they would swear my marriage was stable. We built a life based on routine, complicity, and those little traditions that seemed to strengthen a couple. The shared coffee before work, the late-night conversations about future plans, the long hug after a hard day. I truly believed we were heading in the same direction. He was always present, attentive, caring, and I never had any real reason to doubt it. At least, not until shortly before that Valentine's Day. My relationship with my sister was always peaceful. We grew up together, sharing secrets, clothes, dreams. She was always around, sometimes too much so, but I always saw it as family closeness, never as a threat. She was part of our routine, Sunday dinners, quick calls during the day, unexpected visits that I interpreted as affection. I never imagined that her presence could carry any other intention, but little by little, small signs began to emerge, subtle enough for me to ignore, but strong enough to leave a hidden discomfort in the back of my mind. Messages that arrived late at night and that he forgot to comment on. Conversations that changed abruptly when I entered the room, paths that crossed too frequently to be a coincidence. And perhaps most unsettling, compliments that were once mine began to be directed at her, comments about how my sister was helpful, intelligent, attentive to detail, things that sounded harmless, but which, when repeated, set off a warning light inside me. Even so, I swept everything under the emotional rug. After all, who hasn't ignored signs out of love? Who hasn't believed that their own intuition was exaggerating, that it was just silly jealousy, that the mind could invent stories that the heart wasn't ready to hear? I repeated this to myself like a mantra, trying to maintain my peace, but the unease grew, silently, begging to be seen. And when the roses reached her hands that day, everything I had pushed away finally made sense. The signs were there all along. I just didn't want to see them. The whole scene still lives in my memory like a frozen portrait, too vivid to forget and too painful to recall without feeling a tightness in my chest. I had just entered the room, perhaps expecting a simple gesture, a hug, a card, anything to mark Valentine's Day in a special way. But instead, I was struck by something I never imagined. The scent of roses filled the air before I even understood what was happening. It was a sweet, fresh smell, the kind that immediately catches your attention. My gaze instinctively followed the fragrance, and there he was, my husband, with a gentle, almost rehearsed smile, holding an impeccable bouquet of red roses, the kind of bouquet any woman would dream of receiving on that day. But the gesture wasn't for me. It was for her, for my sister. Her expression was a mixture of surprise and restrained discomfort, as if she didn't quite know what to do with the flowers or the situation. But at the same time, there was something in their gaze, A quick, almost imperceptible exchange that made my heart plummet. I simply froze. My body wouldn't move. My mind couldn't form coherent thoughts. All I could feel was a wave of disbelief and pain tearing through me, a cruel feeling of being left out of my own wedding, in my own home. It felt like I was watching someone else's life unfold, as if it weren't real. And while they exchanged timid words, trying to justify the unjustifiable with nervous laughter, I remained there, motionless, trying to understand which part of the journey I had missed. The question echoing in my head was simple and devastating. When did I stop being a priority? That moment, that gesture that should have symbolized love, became for me a clear sign, perhaps the clearest of all, that something was profoundly wrong. And it was there, with the scent of roses still lingering in the air and my heart struggling not to crumble, that a silent truth formed within me. That's when I realized I needed to put myself first. At that moment I didn't know how, when, or where I would make that decision, but I knew I would never again let anyone diminish my worth like that. After the roses, anyone else would have exploded, confronted, demanded explanations, created an immediate storm. But something inside me changed in that instant. I don't know if it was an instinct for emotional survival, maturity, or simply exhaustion. What I do know is that, instead of reacting, I observed. I took a deep breath, swallowed the pain, and let my eyes capture details I had previously ignored. It was as if a lens had been placed over my life, magnifying everything that had been there all along, but that I refused to see. That's how I started connecting the dots. Small scattered clues began to form a logical thread. Meetings, he said, were urgent. Documents that disappeared from his desk and reappeared signed. Files I'd never seen open on his computer. Comments about a project that wasn't ready, when in fact I knew it was almost finished. And curiously, every time I wanted to talk about it, he would change the subject, move to another room, or say he was too tired to discuss work. My sister also seemed strangely involved. She would show up at unlikely times, comment on ideas that were supposed to be just between us, and new technical details that I had never shared with her. The closeness between the two of them didn't seem merely emotional. There was something professional, something planned, something that reeked of self-interest. And that's when I realized that acting on emotion would only put me at a disadvantage. If I confronted it too early, I would be handing over my vulnerability on a silver platter. No, I needed to be smarter. I needed to see, hear, learn. I needed to understand the magnitude of the situation before making any move. So I did the opposite of the obvious. I distanced myself emotionally, but I drew closer mentally. I began to analyze every word, every glance, every change in routine. I started opening my own documents, reviewing contracts, checking email histories. And the more I investigated, the more an uncomfortable feeling grew inside me, the feeling that the bouquet of roses was just the surface. It was in this silent, calculated, almost clinical process that the truth began to emerge. It wasn't about jealousy. It wasn't about a hidden romance. It was something much deeper, much more valuable, much more dangerous. And that's when I discovered something much bigger than a bouquet. Long before the roses, long before any sign of betrayal, I had dedicated months to a project born from something pure, my creativity. It was an innovative idea, something that could transform part of the market we worked in. I spent nights studying, developing prototypes, designing functionalities, researching gaps in the sector. I believed so much in that project that, at a certain point, it became almost an extension of myself. It wasn't just a product. It was a dream that I thought was being built together. But as I began to investigate quietly, I discovered that the project wasn't as forgotten as I'd imagined. It was just being handled behind my back. The first clue came from a document I found open on his computer desktop, a draft patent application. At first, I thought it was a proposal for us to discuss together, until I noticed the detail that made my blood run cold. The name on the document was his, only his, as if the entire creation, all the research, all the effort had been exclusively his work. My sister was listed as a collaborating assistant, a role that, in practice, never existed. She never participated in the development, never designed with me, never spent a night reviewing data. Yet she was there, cited as strategic support. The most painful thing was realizing that, while I believed I was surrounded by people who supported me, they were using what I created to build something that completely excluded me. Gradually, I came to understand the bouquet of roses wasn't a symbol of love. It was a symbol of distraction, something to divert my eyes from what truly mattered. While I grappled with the emotional turmoil, they silently moved, attempting to register as their own what had been born from my mind, what had emerged from my hours of study, from my hands, from my solitary effort. It was at that moment that a cruel truth imposed itself upon me. Sometimes the greatest betrayal is not emotional but financial. The feeling of having been deceived, not just as a woman but as a professional, as a creator, ignited within me a kind of pain that doesn't burn, it freezes, a pain that transforms. And there, faced with that discovery, I realized that the fight I needed to wage was much bigger than a troubled marriage. It was about my worth, my work, my future. After I found the patent document with my husband's name on it, something inside me finally awakened. The pain was still there, of course, but now it was mixed with a cold, calculated, almost strategic lucidity. I knew I needed to be absolutely certain before confronting either of them. So I began to observe, this time, not as a wounded wife, but as someone who needed to see the truth behind the appearances. That's how I noticed the casual meetings that happened when I left the house. They would meet in the living room, the kitchen, the backyard, never far enough away to seem suspicious, but always too close to be a coincidence. They would talk quietly, exchange quick glances and interrupt the conversation as soon as I entered the room. At first, I tried to believe I was imagining things, but the frequency of the meetings left no room for doubt. I then began to pay attention to the simplest details. His computer, for example, was always on, as if it were being used in a hurry. Documents were minimized as soon as my footsteps echoed in the hallway, and my sister, who previously rarely interfered in work-related matters, now seemed to know more than she should. She asked subtle questions, followed conversations, and offered suggestions that clearly hadn't come from her. Each small clue was like a puzzle piece fitting into the bigger picture, and the bigger picture was ugly. To be sure, I discreetly began gathering evidence. I took photos of open documents on the monitor, recorded dates, times, and notes left on the table. I searched through email histories whenever he forgot to close the account, always carefully, always ready to close everything the second he heard footsteps. My heart raced with each discovery, not out of fear of being caught, but out of the growing horror of realizing that they were, in fact, building a plan that completely excluded me. The tension was constant. I felt like I was living in enemy territory, surrounded by people who smiled at me while plotting something against me, and the more I discovered, the more dangerous everything seemed. It wasn't just a project. It wasn't just a document. It was my job, my future, my financial independence being ripped away from me by the very people I least expected. And it was during one of these silent investigations, when I finally found definitive proof of what they intended to do, that the truth fell upon me like a weight impossible to ignore. A prearranged email, a finalized draft, a date set to register the patent, without me. At that moment, I understood with absolute clarity. When I found out what they were trying to do, there was no going back. When I found the prearranged email and the finalized documents to register the project in their name, something inside me finally solidified. There was no more room for doubt, no excuses, and no naivete that for so long had made me see everything through overly sweet eyes. Right there, in that instant, I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to act, and I would do it silently, calculatedly, and with impeccable precision. The next day, without telling anyone, I scheduled an appointment with a lawyer specializing in intellectual property. I entered the room trembling inside, but with a composed face. I explained everything, from the development of the idea to the attempts to register it without my consent. He listened attentively to every detail, noting key points. When I finished, he took a deep breath and said, "You have more rights than you realize." It was during that consultation that I learned what registering a patent truly meant. I discovered that to be recognized as the legitimate author, I needed to prove the creative process. Drafts, dates, prototypes, messages, files saved on my computer. And I had everything. Every step, every change, every version of the idea was saved, documented, evidence that until then, I never imagined I would need to protect myself from the people I trusted most. I also learned that there were formal steps involved in registering a patent: a complete technical description of the product, the development drawings or minutes, the claim of what made the idea unique, and the inventor's signature, in this case mine. They didn't have any of that legitimately. None of it could be falsified without leaving legal traces. That conversation completely changed my perspective. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what they were trying to do to me. I was anticipating it. I left there with a clear plan and a determination I hadn't felt in years. In the following days, I consulted even more experts. A patent analyst, a second lawyer to confirm everything, and even a technical consultant to review my documentation. I left no loopholes. I left no gaps. While they underestimated me, believing I was too emotionally fragile to see through their scheme, I was putting together the greatest strategy of my life. And the more I studied, the more I realized that I had in my hands not just a defense, but an opportunity, a chance to turn the game around definitively. The stage was set. The pieces were in position. The truth was on my side. Now, all I needed to do was deliver the final blow. The day they had chosen to register the patent was marked in the pre-arranged email. I knew exactly the time, the location, and even the room number where they intended to file the application, as if they were the legitimate creators of my idea. But what they didn't know was that, from the moment they discovered the plan, I was already several steps ahead. I woke up early before sunrise. There was no more pain, no tears, no hesitation. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I hadn't seen in a long time. A determined, strong, and strategic woman. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was in control of my own life. I gathered all the documentation reviewed by the experts, every piece of evidence of my creative process, every detail proving that the invention was exclusively mine. I put it all in a sturdy folder, took a deep breath, and went to the patent office hours before them. The atmosphere was quiet, professional, almost intimidating, but I walked with the posture of someone who knows exactly what they're doing. I reached the counter, handed over my documents, answered the questions clearly, and signed my claim as the inventor. I didn't tremble, I didn't hesitate, and when I finished the process, the clerk stamped the paperwork with a dry sound that echoed like a victory. My registration was officially started. As I left the building, a strange feeling washed over me. It wasn't euphoria, it was something bigger, a liberation, the transformation of a woman who once felt betrayed into someone who now commanded the situation with intelligence and firmness. Hours later, when my husband and sister arrived at the same building, hoping to register the patent they had tried to steal from me, they discovered that someone had already filed everything, and that someone was me. They were bewildered, not knowing how it had happened. Their shock was almost palpable. At that moment, as I watched them from afar, I felt a force I had never felt before. They tried to use me. They tried to erase my work. They tried to take away something that was born from my mind. But they couldn't, and the phrase that echoed within me, and which I would repeat without fear if I needed to confront them, was simple, firm, and true. If they wanted to use me, they should at least be smart enough to protect me. And at that moment, I realized that my life would never be the same again. Late in the afternoon of that same day, my husband returned home with the confidence of someone who believes he has everything under control. He entered with that expression of false superiority, as if he were ready to inform me of something important, perhaps even give me some rehearsed excuse to justify his trip to the patent office. I watched him in silence, feeling the weight of the decision I had already made. He approached with a tense smile, saying we needed to talk. His posture made it clear. He thought he had won. A few minutes later, my sister also arrived, her face a little anxious, as if she were expecting to participate in a secret celebration. They exchanged quick, knowing glances, believing they had taken a decisive step towards the plan they had hatched behind my back. And for a few seconds, I let them believe it. I wanted to see how far they would go. My husband began with a speech full of half-truths. He talked about business, about opportunities, about how it would be better for everyone if the project were in his name. My sister, trying to soften the situation, added comments about just helping, just supporting, as if all her involvement had been out of concern for me. Their narrative was perfectly rehearsed, everything calculated, everything organized to convince me that it was for my own good, when, in reality, they were taking away from me the only thing that truly mattered at that moment, my job. That's when I decided to end the charade. Without raising my voice, without losing control, I simply opened the folder beside me and took out the official document, the stamped, certified, and registered copy. I handed it to my husband first. He took it confidently, and as he read, his smile vanished. His eyes widened. The color of his face changed. He turned the paper over, believing he was reading it wrong, but he wasn't. My name was there. I was the inventor. I was the patent holder. I owned the patent. My sister, realizing something was wrong, snatched the document from his hands, and the impact hit them both like a silent but devastating bomb. The shock etched on her face was almost theatrical. Disbelief, followed by impotent anger, and then a disguised fear that she tried to hide behind flimsy justifications. They stammered, tried to explain, tried to turn the situation around, but there was no more room for lies. The room fell silent for a few seconds that felt like minutes. I watched the two of them, so small in that moment, so lost in their own trap, and I felt something different. Not revenge, not triumph, but clarity. A clarity I had never felt before. It was there, seeing the two of them confront the truth they tried to steal from me, that I finally realized my true worth. When silence finally filled the room and they faced the truth they had tried so hard to manipulate, something inside me reorganized itself. It wasn't joy, nor a feeling of victory over someone. It was something much more serene and powerful. Clarity. For the first time in a long time, I saw my own worth without depending on anyone else's gaze. I understood that the strength I had been searching for outside was, all along, within me, just waiting for the right moment to emerge. That painful situation, which began with a bouquet of roses given to the wrong person, taught me more than any book, therapy, or advice could. I learned that boundaries are not signs of weakness. They are protection. I learned that trusting doesn't mean closing your eyes, and that loving doesn't require you to erase yourself. And above all, I understood that betrayal doesn't always come as a hidden kiss or a suspicious message. Sometimes it comes disguised as partnership, kindness, or familial closeness. But there, with the document in my hands and the truth etched on their faces, I also realized that I didn't need to lose myself to reclaim what was mine. The pain had been real, intense, cruel, but it pushed me toward a version of myself that I might never have found on my own. A strong, intelligent, strategic woman, deeply aware of her own worth. And that's why, looking back, that phrase makes even more sense to me. Not as a venting of frustration, but as a declaration of identity. Roses wither, but intelligence and strategy bloom forever. Because love can fail, people can disappoint, promises can break, but the ability to get up, to act, to rebuild oneself, that has never depended on anyone but myself. So by sharing this story, my wish is that each person watching looks at their own life with honesty and courage, that they identify where they have diminished themselves, where they have accepted crumbs, where they have allowed others to decide their destiny, and that, like me, you find the strength to reclaim what has always been rightfully yours, your worth, your voice, your story. Have you ever been in a situation where you were underestimated and you turned the tables? Share your story in the comments. Leave a like and subscribe to support more stories like this one.